The chandeliers of the Metropolis Grand Ballroom did not so much illuminate the room as they bled light. 1,000 crystal facets dripping brilliance like frozen tears onto the city's assembled elite. It was a gilded cage, and its occupants, preening and predatory in their silks and tailored suits, moved through the golden light with practiced ease. Conversations were murmurs of silk and steel, the clinking of champagne flutes, a delicate counterpoint to the quiet, brutal calculus of power being exchanged with every smile and handshake. This was the Metropolis Benefactors Gala, the annual apex of the city's philanthropic food chain, and Alara Vance stood at its heart, an island of impossible stillness. She was here to be honored, to receive the prestigious Vanguard Award for her work as the founder of the Vance Institute for Emerging Leaders. Her life's work, the sanctuary she had built from the ground up, a place that nurtured the city's brightest, most overlooked young minds. Her gown was a column of deep emerald silk, severe and elegant. It was a suit of armor. Her dark hair was swept back in a chignon, so precise it could have been sculpted from obsidian. Every detail of her appearance was a declaration of control, a carefully constructed fortress against a world that had once tried to tear her apart. From her place at the head table, she watched him move through the room. Julian Croft, tech billionaire, civic savior, the city's favorite son. He was handsome in that effortless way that comes from a life devoid of obstacles, his smile a weapon of mass appeal. He greeted senators and socialites with the same easy charm, his public persona as polished and impenetrable as the sapphire on his cufflink. To the world, he was a rival philanthropist, a friendly competitor in the noble game of giving back. To Alara, he was the architect of a quiet, suffocating siege against everything she had ever built. The master of ceremonies, a man with a voice as smooth as aged whiskey, was at the podium, and now, to present this year's Vanguard Award to a truly remarkable leader, a man who needs no introduction, the founder of Croft Innovations and a titan of modern philanthropy, Mr. Julian Croft. A wave of deferential applause swept the room. Julian ascended the stage, his every step radiating a confident grace that made Alara's stomach clench. He approached the podium, the stage lights catching the warm highlights in his hair. He looked out at the audience, his gaze sweeping over the powerful faces until it landed, with surgical precision, on hers. The polite, public smile never left his face, but in his eyes, she saw the cold, familiar glint of a hunter cornering its prey. "Thank you," he began, his voice amplified throughout the cavernous ballroom. "It is a profound honor to be here tonight, celebrating a spirit of generosity that makes Metropolis the great city it is. And it is a particular privilege to present this award to Alara Vance." He paused, letting her name hang in the air. The room was silent, expectant. He turned his body slightly, directing his words to her now. Alara kept her expression neutral, a mask of serene appreciation she had perfected over years of practice. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. "The Vance Institute," Julian continued, his tone one of deep admiration, "is a testament to what one person with unwavering focus can achieve. Alara has created a haven, a place where potential is not just discovered, but forged." He smiled again, a wider, more generous expression that the audience drank in. "She has an unparalleled gift for survival." The word landed not like a compliment, but like a stone thrown in a silent room. It was a subtle discordance, a note played slightly off-key that only one person in the audience was meant to hear. A flicker of confusion passed through some of the faces at the front tables. Survival. An odd choice of words for a philanthropy award. Alara did not flinch. She did not blink. She built a fortress of stillness around herself, a quiet space in the heart of the storm he was creating. She knew this was just the overture. Julian's gaze held hers, a silent, vicious dialogue passing between them across the polished expanse of the ballroom. "She knows. Better than anyone," he went on, his voice softening into a tone of feigned empathy. "How some futures must be built upon the ashes of others." And there it was, the blade, wrapped in velvet, to the rapt audience. It was a slightly clumsy, perhaps overly dramatic metaphor for overcoming adversity. To Alara, it was the sound of a key turning in the lock of a room she had kept sealed for a decade. A room filled with the smell of rain-slicked asphalt, shattered glass, and the ghost of a scream. His sister's scream. A wave of dizziness washed over her, the opulent ballroom momentarily blurring at the edges. The murmur of the crowd, the scent of expensive perfume, the oppressive weight of 1,000 glittering lights had all faded, replaced by a phantom chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. She forced the world back into focus. She met Julian's gaze. The polite smile was still fixed on his face, but his eyes were triumphant. He had done it, in a room full of her most important supporters, allies, and board members. He had reached into her past and laid a finger on her deepest trauma. All without saying a single word, anyone could call an accusation. He had publicly branded her with her own private horror, and she could do nothing but sit there and accept her award. The master of ceremonies was speaking again, his voice pulling her back to the surface. Alara Vance. The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation. She rose from her chair, her movements fluid and measured. Each step she took toward the stage was an act of will, a battle against the tremor in her hands and the ice in her veins. She ascended the stairs, the emerald silk of her gown whispering against the carpet. She reached the podium and stood beside him. The proximity was suffocating. She could smell his cologne, a clean, sharp scent that was suddenly, nauseatingly familiar. He held the award out to her, a heavy, star-shaped sculpture of cut crystal. "Congratulations, Ilara," he said, his voice a low murmur for her ears only. "No one deserves it more." She took the award from him. Her fingers brushed his, and his skin felt like ice. She turned to the podium, gripping its sides to steady herself. She looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of wealth and influence, all of them smiling at her, applauding her. They were celebrating a woman they did not know, a story they could not comprehend. They saw Alara Vance, the poised and brilliant founder. They did not see the terrified 19-year-old girl pulling herself from the wreckage of a twisted car, the sole survivor of a tragedy that Julian Croft would never let her forget. He had spent the last 10 years trying to make her pay for that night. His methods had grown more sophisticated over time, from anonymous whispers to strategic business moves. But the goal remained the same: to dismantle her life, piece by piece. Tonight, he had escalated. He had brought his war into the open, cloaking it in the language of praise. He was telling her that there was no sanctuary, no achievement great enough to protect her from him. She drew a breath, slow and controlled. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold. A discipline learned not from a father, but from the raw necessity of survival. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She would accept this award. She would deliver her speech. She would smile and shake the hands of her well-wishers. And then she would burn his world to the ground. The Vance Institute for Emerging Leaders was not housed in a gleaming tower of glass and steel. It occupied a repurposed brownstone on a tree-lined street, a historic building that Alara had painstakingly restored. where Julian's corporate headquarters promised transparency, but offered only reflections. The Institute was a sanctuary of rich mahogany, worn leather armchairs, and the quiet, determined hum of young minds at work. It smelled of old books and fresh coffee, a place where ideas were the most valuable currency. The day after the gala, the oppressive weight of the previous night's humiliation clung to Alara like the city's morning mist. She had replayed Julian's words 1,000 times, each repetition sharpening the edges of the veiled threat, built upon the ashes of others. He was no longer content with subtle sabotage. He was composing her eulogy. "You were magnificent last night," Anya Sharma said, placing a steaming mug of tea on Alara's desk. Anya was more than an assistant. She was Alara's confidant, her strategist, and the unwavering guardian of the Institute's mission. With her sharp eyes and even sharper mind, she saw things others missed, poised, gracious, everything they expected. "It was a performance," Alara replied, her voice flat. She stared at the crystal award sitting on her credenza, its sharp points glinting in the morning light. It felt like a mockery. "I know," Anya said softly. She pulled up a chair. "I also know Julian Croft." His choice of words was deliberate. What was he referring to? Alara hesitated. It was a story she had shared with no one, a sealed vault within her. But Julian was rattling the door, and the secrets inside were becoming a liability. A long time ago. Anya. Something from university. The dismissal was reflexive, a habit of containment forged over a decade. Anya didn't press, but her silence was more potent than any question. It was a quiet offering of trust, an invitation Alara wasn't yet ready to accept. Instead, Alara changed the subject. "What's the status of the community partnership grant with the city?" Anya's expression tightened. "That's what I came to talk to you about. I got a call this morning from Councilwoman Davis's office. They're putting our application on hold. Indefinitely." Alara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. On what grounds? They were vague. Concerns about fiscal stewardship, and a need for further review of your foundation's financial disclosures. It sounds like someone planted a seed of doubt. "Not a seed," Alara said, her voice turning to ice. "A weed, and I know the gardener." Julian's attack at the gala wasn't the main event. It was the overture. This was the first movement of his symphony of destruction. The city grant was crucial, a cornerstone of their planned expansion to provide scholarships for a new cohort of students. Before Anya could respond, Ilara's office line chimed. It was the front desk. "Mr. Sterling is here to see you. Ms. Vance. He doesn't have an appointment." Arthur Sterling was a senior member of the Institute's board, a man of old money and even older opinions. He was a necessary evil, his connections vital for fundraising. But his loyalty had always been conditional, his support tethered to the Institute's pristine public image. He was also, Alara knew, an old friend of the Croft family. "Send him in," Alara said, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. She stood as Sterling entered, a portly man in a pinstripe suit that seemed too formal for the warm atmosphere of the Institute. "Ilara, my dear," he began, his tone a practiced blend of paternal concern and subtle condescension. "A word, if I may." "Of course. Arthur, please, have a seat." He ignored the offered chair, choosing to loom over her desk. "I was at the gala last night. A wonderful tribute to your work. Truly." He paused. Julian Croft's speech was memorable. "He has a way with words," Alara said evenly. "Indeed. He also has a way with numbers," Sterling said, getting to his point. I had breakfast with him this morning. He expressed some concerns. As a fellow philanthropist, of course, he's worried about the Institute's aggressive spending on your new mentorship programs. Alara felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp. She quelled it instantly. Our spending is entirely in line with the budget the board approved. Arthur, you signed off on it yourself. Budgets are fluid. Alara, perceptions are not. He countered, your passion is so admirable. Dear. But in this climate, we must ensure it doesn't cloud your fiscal judgment. Julian is a very influential man. If he perceives a problem, others will too. The city council, for instance. It was a perfectly delivered threat, wrapped in the guise of friendly advice. Julian wasn't just attacking her. He was mobilizing her own board against her. Alara met Sterling's gaze. Her own unflinching. Her control over her language was her primary weapon. Thank you for sharing your concerns. Arthur, I appreciate your candor. She tilted her head slightly. Are you suggesting that fiscal prudence and genuine compassion are mutually exclusive goals? Sterling was momentarily flustered, the hypocrisy of his position politely exposed. Of course not. I'm merely suggesting caution. A strategic pause. Perhaps. We wouldn't want any unpleasantness to tarnish the Institute's good name. The only unpleasantness I foresee, Alara said, her voice dangerously soft, is the damage that will be done to our students' futures if we allow unfounded rumors to derail our mission. I will be preparing a full supplementary report for the board to address these baseless concerns. I trust that will be sufficient. It was a dismissal, polite but absolute. Sterling, checkmated, could only nod. Yes. Well, very good. Just be careful. Alara. He turned and left, his expensive shoes squeaking on the polished hardwood floors. When he was gone, Anya closed the door. He's one of them. He's a weather vane. Anya. He points whichever way the most powerful wind is blowing. Right now. That's Julian. Alara walked to the window, looking down at the students crossing the courtyard below. A young woman with a scholarship for astrophysics. A boy from the foster care system who was now coding at a genius level. These were the lives in the balance. Julian has been chipping away at our foundations for years, poaching a donor here, whispering a rumor there. But this is different. This is a coordinated assault. So, what's our next move? Anya asked, her voice steady. Alara turned from the window, a new, hard light in her eyes. We stopped playing defense. For years. I've been absorbing his attacks, trying to protect the Institute by being unimpeachable. It's not enough. He's not attacking the Institute's balance sheets. He's attacking me. She finally looked at the Crystal Award, not as a trophy, but as a gauntlet that had been thrown. He wants a war. It's time we gave him one. The first casualty of that war arrived 3 days later, delivered not by a soldier, but by a courier. It was a formal letter from the State Attorney General's office. An anonymous complaint, it said, had triggered a full public investigation into the Vance Institute's financial practices. Attached to the letter was a link to a news article, already published on the website of the Metropolis Chronicle. The headline was a gut punch: Vance Institute under investigation for mismanagement of funds. Philanthropic, darling faces scrutiny. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation, quoting anonymous sources who worried about lavish spending and lack of oversight. It detailed the grant application that the city had put on hold. And buried in the 7th paragraph was a doctored financial report, a version of their internal budget so cleverly twisted that it made their scholarship stipends look like executive bonuses. Alara stared at the screen, a roaring silence in her ears. The report was a forgery, but a brilliant one. It would take weeks of forensic accounting to disprove it, weeks during which her reputation, and the Institute's, would be systematically dismantled in the court of public opinion. Julian's name appeared nowhere in the article, but his fingerprints were everywhere. This was his inciting incident. He had taken their private conflict and dragged it onto a public stage, shining a spotlight so harsh it was meant to burn her alive. He had forced her hand. She was no longer just defending her life's work. She was fighting for her life. The emergency board meeting was convened in the Institute's conference room, a space normally filled with collaborative energy and optimistic planning. Today, it felt like an interrogation chamber. The long mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the 10 board members, the air thick with tension and the cloying scent of fear. Arthur Sterling, looking grave and important, sat at the head of the table opposite Alara. He had positioned himself as the voice of reason, the steady hand in a crisis of her making. Alara could see Julian's influence in the carefully arranged seating. Her few staunch allies placed at the far ends of the table, isolated, while Sterling was flanked by his own faction of skeptics and social climbers. "As you all know," Sterling began, his voice resonating with false solemnity, "we are facing a crisis of confidence. The investigation by the Attorney General, coupled with the unfortunate media attention, has put the Institute in a precarious position." He looked directly at Alara. "Alara, we all admire your vision. But we must be frank. This happened on your watch." The accusation, delivered with the smooth finality of a judge's gavel, hung in the air. This was the first obstacle, the internal coup. Alara did not look down. She met Sterling's gaze, her posture immaculate, her hands resting calmly on the portfolio in front of her. "Thank you. Arthur, let's be perfectly frank. Then, the Institute has not mismanaged any funds. We are the victims of a malicious and targeted leak of falsified documents." Falsified, another board member, a woman named Margaret who valued her social standing above all else, chimed in. The Chronicle seemed quite certain of their authenticity. The Chronicle was fed a story by an anonymous source. Alara replied, her tone crisp and factual. A source with a vested interest in seeing this institute fail. "That's a serious allegation." "Alara," Sterling said, leaning forward, "do you have any proof of this?" Sabotage. This was the trap. She knew Julian was behind it, but she had no concrete evidence, only a decade of psychological warfare that would sound paranoid if spoken aloud. "My proof is in the truth of our financial records, which we will present to the Attorney General, but that will take time. In the interim, our reputation is bleeding out, which, I suspect, was the primary goal." She opened her portfolio and slid a single-page summary across the table to each member. "This is a preliminary breakdown prepared by our accountants overnight. It cross-references every expenditure questioned in the article with our board-approved budget. As you can see, every dollar is accounted for. The narrative of lavish spending is a fiction created by misrepresenting our student support funds, scholarships, housing stipends, and meal allowances as administrative overhead." A few of the board members studied the document, their expressions shifting from accusation to consideration. Her staunchest ally, a retired judge named Elena Rodriguez, spoke up from the end of the table. "This is clear and concise. Alara, the numbers don't lie." "Numbers can be confusing to the public." Elena. Sterling countered smoothly. "Perception is the reality here. Our donors are calling, they're worried. The question before us is not about accounting. It's about leadership. Can we, in good conscience, ask our supporters to stand by us when our founder and director is the subject of a state investigation?" He let the question sink in, a poison seeping into the room's atmosphere. This was his endgame, to frame her as a liability and pressure her into resigning for the good of the Institute. "I find the timing of this anonymous complaint rather curious," Judge Rodriguez said, her sharp eyes fixed on Sterling. It appeared just days after the benefactor's gala, where Ms. Vance was honored. It almost seems strategic. Sterling waved a dismissive hand. "Let's not indulge in conspiracy theories. We must deal with the facts before us. A vote of no confidence may be premature, but I believe we must consider appointing an interim director to guide the Institute through this investigation, allowing Alara to focus on her legal defense." The room fell silent. It was a clever move, not an outright firing, but a public stripping of her authority. It would be a fatal blow. Alara let the silence stretch for a beat, forcing them to contemplate the weight of his proposal. Then she spoke, her voice devoid of the anger and fear churning inside her. It was calm, measured, and utterly resolute. Appointing an interim director would be an admission of guilt. She stated simply, it would signal to the public, to our donors, and most importantly, to our students, that we believe there is merit to these fraudulent claims. It would validate the attack. I will not allow that. She stood up, her presence commanding the room's full attention. I built this institute from an idea into a nationally recognized organization. I have poured every ounce of my life into its mission. I will not be pushed aside by a phantom accuser who hides in the shadows and manipulates the truth. She looked at each board member, one by one, her gaze lingering on those she knew were wavering. You are right, Arthur. This is a question of leadership. A leader does not abandon their post in a crisis. They face it, they fight, and they win. She paused, then delivered her final, decisive play. I am not asking for your blind faith. I am asking for 48 hours. Give me 2 days, and I will bring you proof of who is behind this attack. If I cannot, I will tender my resignation. A gamble. A massive, terrifying gamble. But it shifted the entire dynamic of the room. She had taken Sterling's passive-aggressive maneuvering and met it with a clear, high-stakes ultimatum. Murmurs erupted around the table. Sterling looked stunned. His carefully orchestrated plan suddenly derailed. He had expected her to defend, to plead. He had not expected her to counterattack. Judge Rodriguez seized the opening. That seems more than fair. 48 hours. All in favor of granting Miss Vance's request. Hands went up around the table. First the allies, then the waverers. And finally, reluctantly, even a few of Sterling's faction, unwilling to appear unreasonable in the face of such a bold proposition. Sterling, seeing he had lost the room, had no choice but to raise his own hand. The motion passed. Alara had won a reprieve, but she had bought it at an immense price. She now had less than 2 days to unmask a ghost, to find irrefutable proof linking the city's most beloved billionaire to a smear campaign. All while, the world watched and waited for her to fall. As the board members filed out, leaving a trail of anxious whispers behind them, only Anya and Judge Rodriguez remained. That was a dangerous move. Alara, the judge said, her expression a mixture of admiration and concern. But a brilliant one. What's your first step? Alara looked at Anya, a silent communication passing between them. The first step, Alara said, her voice a low, determined hum, is to stop looking for a smoking gun and start looking for the arsenal. The clock was ticking, each second a grain of sand slipping through the hourglass of her career. Alara and Anya transformed the office into a war room, Whiteboards were covered in diagrams, connecting names, dates, and corporations. Coffee went cold in forgotten mugs. Sleep became a luxury they could not afford. "Julian is too smart to leave a direct trail," Alara said, pacing the room. "No emails, no traceable money transfers. He operates through layers of plausible deniability." "So we can't look at what he's doing now," Anya reasoned, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "We have to look at his past. There has to be a pattern." They began a deep dive into Julian Croft's history. Not the polished biography on his company's website, but the raw data of his corporate life. They analyzed every acquisition, every merger, every philanthropic donation his empire had made in the last 10 years. For hours. It was a frustrating dead end. His business dealings were aggressive, but legally sound. His philanthropy was strategic, always generating maximum positive press. "Wait," Anya said late into the first night, leaning closer to her screen. "Look at this. Croft Innovations acquired a small biotech firm 5 years ago, Audentes Therapeutics. It was a promising startup, on the verge of a breakthrough in gene therapy." "I remember that," Alara said. "It was a hostile takeover. The founders were furious." "Right. But look what happened after the acquisition," Anya said. Clicking through financial statements, Croft Innovations absorbed their patents, then completely dismantled the company, laid off the entire research staff. The founders lost everything. One of them, a Dr. Eris Thorne, publicly accused Croft of corporate sabotage, claiming Julian only bought the company to bury their research because it competed with a product from another company he was invested in. The media dismissed Thorne as a sore loser, Alara recalled. "Exactly. But what if he wasn't?" Anya pulled up another file. 2 years before that, Croft's foundation made a massive grant to a local arts collective, saving it from bankruptcy. A year later, they defaulted on the terms of the grant, and Croft's foundation took ownership of their building a prime piece of real estate he later sold for a huge profit. A chilling pattern began to emerge from the data. Julian didn't just defeat his opponents, he hollowed them out from the inside, using their own strengths against them. He acquired and dismantled. He saved and then foreclosed. He found the cracks in an organization's foundation and inserted a wedge until the whole structure collapsed. "He's doing the same thing to us," Alara whispered, the realization settling like a shroud. "He's using our mission, our spending on students, as the weapon to destroy us." As Anya continued to dig into Julian's corporate history, Alara found her own mind drifting, pulled back by an unwanted tide of memory. The sterile smell of the hospital, the insistent beeping of a heart monitor, the detective's gentle but probing questions. Julian's face, contorted with a grief so raw and savage it had terrified her. "You were driving." He had snarled at her in the hospital hallway, his voice a venomous hiss. "No," she had whispered, her own body a constellation of pain. "Sarah was driving." "Liar," he had screamed, his control shattering. "You killed her. You were always jealous of her. You killed my sister." A sudden, sharp sound pulled her back to the present. Anya had dropped a pen. "Alara, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Alara shook her head, trying to clear the image of Julian's grief-stricken face. "It's nothing. Just memories." The past was no longer a distant country. It was a hostile neighbor, building fortifications on her border. She was beginning to understand that the key to Julian's present actions was buried in that shared, traumatic past. The sabotage wasn't just business, it was punishment. "We need more than a pattern of behavior," Alara said, forcing herself to focus. "Sterling and the board will dismiss this as circumstantial. We need a direct link, something that ties Julian, personally, To the attack on the Institute. The doctored report. Anya said. It was sophisticated. Not something an amateur could whip up. Whoever did it knows corporate finance inside and out. We need a specialist, Ilara decided. A forensic accountant. Someone who can trace the digital DNA of that file and isn't afraid to go up against Julian Croft. Judge Rodriguez, when they called her, knew just the person, Leo Pasternak. She said, "He's a cynical, cantankerous genius. He used to be the top fraud investigator for the SEC until he got tired of the bureaucracy. Now he works as a freelance consultant for clients he finds interesting. He's expensive, and he's difficult. But if anyone can find a needle in a digital haystack, it's Leo." Leo Pasternak's office was a cluttered room above a bakery, smelling faintly of yeast and old paper. He was a small, wiry man with glasses perched on the end of his nose and an expression of perpetual skepticism. He listened to Ilara's story without interruption, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for flaws in her narrative. "Julian Croft," he said when she finished, steepling his fingers. "You're trying to pick a fight with God. In this city. That's what he is. Why?" "Because he's trying to destroy my life's work, and he's using lies to do it," Ilara said simply. Leo grunted, a sound of grudging respect. "I'll need access to all your original financial records, your servers, everything, and I'll need my fee up front." He named a figure that made Ilara's breath catch. It would drain a significant portion of her personal savings. She didn't hesitate. Done. For the next 24 hours. Leo worked with a ferocious intensity, fueled by black coffee and a palpable disdain for the wealthy elite who thought they were above the rules. Ilara and Anya fed him data, answered his cryptic questions, and watched as he navigated labyrinthine code and encrypted files. With only a few hours left until the board meeting, he called them over to his monitor. The file sent to the Chronicle was routed through a dozen anonymous servers to hide its origin, standard procedure for a high-level leak. "So it's untraceable," Anya said, her shoulders slumping. "Nothing is untraceable." Leo scoffed. "It's just a question of how many doors you have to kick down. The forgery itself is very, very good. The metadata was scrubbed clean. But," he grinned, a rare and wolfish expression, "amateurs always miss one thing. The software itself. The program used to create this forgery has a unique digital signature. It's a proprietary accounting suite developed and used by only one corporation in the world." He clicked a final key, and a logo filled the screen. A stylized C intertwined with an infinity symbol. "Croft Innovations," Ilara breathed. "Bingo," Leo said. "It's not a smoking gun. They'll claim industrial espionage. Say the file was stolen by a disgruntled employee. But it's a direct, undeniable link between the weapon used in the attack and Julian Croft's arsenal." It was the proof she needed, enough to sway the board, to cast serious doubt on Julian's public persona. As Anya called Judge Rodriguez to share the news, Ilara felt a surge of triumph, the first in a long time. But her victory was short-lived. Leo was still digging. His curiosity piqued. "There's something else here," he muttered, typing furiously. "When I was tracing Croft's financial architecture, I found the holding companies he uses for his more discreet ventures, shell corporations, standard stuff for a billionaire. But look at the incorporation dates." He brought up a list on the screen, a dozen companies, all established in different states, under different names. But they all shared one thing. They were all registered on the same day, Anya said, reading the screen. October 27th, every year, for the last 10 years. Ilara's blood ran cold. October 27th. The date was seared into her memory, a brand on her soul. She stumbled back from the desk, her hand flying to her mouth, a wave of vertigo so profound she had to grip a chair to keep from falling. The smell of rain, the sound of screeching tires, the horrifying, final crunch of metal. "Ilara, what is it?" Anya cried, rushing to her side. But Ilara couldn't speak. She could only stare at the date on the screen. It wasn't a random anniversary. It wasn't a birthday. It was the day of the accident, the day Sarah Croft died. In that moment, everything snapped into a terrible, crystalline focus. The decade of subtle sabotage, the veiled threats, the relentless, obsessive need to see her fail. It wasn't about business competition. It was never about philanthropy. It was a memorial, a monument of hate built, year after year, on the anniversary of his sister's death. Anya, seeing the look on Ilara's face, began searching online. Her query was simple Julian Croft sister. The results were immediate. An old news article from a university paper, a photo of a smiling, dark-haired girl, and a headline, "Tragic Accident Claims Life of University Student Sarah Croft. Fellow student Ilara Vance survives." Anya looked from the screen to Ilara, her eyes wide with horrified understanding. "Oh, Ilara," she whispered. Ilara found an old box in the back of her closet that evening, a collection of university memorabilia she hadn't opened in years. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid. Beneath a stack of textbooks was a photograph. 3 young people, their arms around each other, grinning at the camera under the shade of a massive oak tree on the university quad. A young, carefree Ilara, a handsome, confident Julian, and in the middle, his arm slung around Ilara's shoulder, was Sarah, vibrant, laughing Sarah, her eyes full of a reckless, brilliant light. The photograph was a relic from another life, a life before the crash, a life where she and Julian had been, not quite friends, but something close, connected by their shared affection for his vivacious, impulsive younger sister. Holding the photo, Ilara finally understood. This wasn't a vendetta. It was a haunting. Julian wasn't just trying to destroy her future. He was trying to rewrite their past, to craft a narrative where she was the villain responsible for his loss. He blamed her for surviving, and he was going to make her survival a fate worse than death. The midpoint twist was not just a revelation of motive. It was a reframing of her entire life for the past decade. She was not just a business rival. She was the ghost at his feast, and he was determined to exorcise her. Armed with the terrible clarity of her discovery, Ilara knew she had to change her strategy. This was no longer a corporate battle to be won with facts and figures in a boardroom. It was a deeply personal war, and the next battlefield had to be of her own choosing. She called Julian and requested a meeting. To his surprise, she suggested his territory, the top floor of the Croft Innovations Tower. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, a glass box climbing the spine of a steel behemoth. She stepped out into his office, a vast, sterile space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike view of the city below. The furniture was minimalist, the art abstract and cold. It was the lair of a man who valued control above all else. Julian was standing by the window, looking out at his kingdom. He turned as she entered, his polite, public mask firmly in place. "Ilara, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Let's dispense with the pleasantries." "Julian," she said, her voice steady. She walked to the center of the room, refusing the chair he gestured toward. She would not sit. She would not be made small in this place. "I know it was you who leaked the doctored report, and I know why." She watched for a flicker of surprise, a crack in the facade. There was none. Only a slow, cold smile spreading across his face. "Do you now?" "October 27th, she said. "The date a weapon in itself. The shell corporations. The acquisitions. Every major move you've made against me, or anyone who reminded you of that time, has been tied to that date. This isn't business, Julian. This is a ritual." For the first time since the gala, his composure wavered. The polite mask dissolved, revealing the raw, unhealed wound beneath. His eyes, which moments before had been a cool, calculated gray, now burned with a decade of carefully nurtured hatred. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snarled. But the denial was weak, reflexive. "Don't I?" Alara took a step closer. "This is about Sarah." His name was a lit match in a room full of dynamite. He recoiled as if struck. "Do not say her name," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You don't have the right." "She was my friend too," Alara said, a tremor of genuine grief in her voice. "You were a parasite," he shot back, his control shattering completely. "You attached yourself to her light, and then you put it out. You were driving that night. You were drunk. You lost control of the car, and you killed her. And you let everyone believe it was just a tragic accident." His version of the story, the lie his grief had constructed, spilled out of him, polished and perfected by 10,000 private repetitions. In his mind, it was the absolute truth. "That's not what happened. And you know it," Alara said softly. "Sarah was driving. We'd been to a party. Yes. But she was the one who had been drinking too much. I tried to take the keys. I tried to get her to slow down." "Lies," he roared, taking a step toward her, his fists clenched. "You walked away from that crash with a few scratches. She never walked away again. You survived, and she didn't. You owe a debt for that. A life for a life." The depth of his delusion was staggering. He had built his entire empire, his celebrated public persona, on the foundation of this single, monstrous lie. He wasn't just avenging his sister. He was preserving a reality that allowed him to function. A reality where he was the righteous avenger, and she was the unpunished villain. "So this is your plan?" Alara asked, her voice hardening. "To take my life's work, to ruin me piece by piece until I have nothing left. That's the payment you demand." "It's a start," he said, his eyes glittering with a chilling fanaticism. "The Institute is just the beginning. It's what you love most. What you built from the ashes of the life you took from my sister. I'm going to take it away from you. I'm going to turn the city against you, your board against you, even your own students against you." He was escalating, feeding on his own rage. This was the second, more dangerous obstacle. He was no longer hiding. He was declaring his intentions. "The board won't remove me," Alara said, bluffing with the knowledge of Leo's discovery. "I have proof the leak came from your company." Julian laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. "That proves nothing. A stray file. A hacker. Plausible deniability is a beautiful thing. But this," he said, picking up a tablet from his desk, "is less deniable." He turned the screen toward her. It displayed a list of names. The top 10 students from the Vance Institute's graduating class. Her brightest stars. Next to their names were their university applications, financial aid forms, and personal essays. "Your students," Julian said, his voice now calm and menacing. "Gifted. Aren't they most of them from difficult backgrounds? They've worked so hard. It would be a shame if their academic records were to be questioned." Alara stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. A few anonymous tips to the admissions offices of their chosen universities. Julian continued conversationally. Suggestions of plagiarism in their essays. Discrepancies in their transcripts. Nothing that can be traced back to me. Of course. But the seeds of doubt will be planted. Their scholarships will be rescinded. Their futures will be ruined. All because of their association with you. This was his masterstroke. He had found her true vulnerability. He wasn't just threatening her. He was threatening the children she had sworn to protect. He was turning her life's purpose into a weapon against her. She was faced with an impossible moral crisis. She could use Leo's evidence to fight back, to expose Julian. But in the ensuing war, her students would become collateral damage. Their lives, their dreams, would be caught in the crossfire. Or she could surrender, resign from the institute, disappear from public life, and perhaps, just perhaps, he would leave her students alone. He saw the conflict in her eyes and pressed his advantage. The Metropolis Leadership Summit is next week, he said. We're both scheduled as keynote speakers. It's being live-streamed globally. It would be the perfect venue for you to announce your resignation. For personal reasons. Of course, a graceful exit. Do that. And your students will be fine. Defy me. And I will burn everything you love to the ground. And I will use your students as the kindling. He had backed her into a corner, leaving her with two choices, both of which led to her destruction. She looked from his triumphant, hate-filled face to the panoramic view of the city behind him, a city that saw him as a hero. She had spent a decade building a fortress of composure and success. Now, he was threatening to tear it down by attacking not her, but the innocent people inside its walls. For the first time, she felt the cold, sharp edge of true despair. The day of the Metropolis Leadership Summit arrived with the kind of oppressive, humid grayness that promised a storm. The atmosphere inside the convention center was electric, a gathering of the city's most powerful figures in politics, business, and technology. The event was being live-streamed, with viewership numbers projected in the millions. It was the biggest stage in the city, and Julian had engineered it to be Alara's public execution. Alara sat in the front row, a portrait of unnerving calm. She wore a simple, structured dress of cobalt blue, another piece of armor. Beside her, Anya offered a silent, supportive presence. In the hours leading up to the summit, they had worked tirelessly. Anya, at Alara's direction, had delved into the one part of the past Alara had never been able to face: the official records of the accident. She had spent years avoiding the police report, the witness statements, the sterile, bureaucratic summary of the worst night of her life. Now, it was her only hope. "Are you sure about this?" Anya had asked, her voice laced with concern. "Revealing everything. It will cost you." "Julian has left me no other choice," Alara had replied. "He thinks he's fighting a ghost. It's time he met the woman." Julian was the first keynote speaker. He took the stage to rapturous applause. He was in his element, charming and inspirational, speaking of civic duty and the future of Metropolis. Then, with a practiced shift in tone, he turned his attention to the Vance Institute. Philanthropy requires not just a good heart, but a rigorous commitment to transparency. He began, his voice filled with sorrowful regret. "It is therefore with a heavy heart that I must share some troubling findings." On the massive screen behind him, documents appeared, bank statements, internal emails, all of it fabricated, but presented with such authority it felt irrefutable. It was the public version of his attack, a tidal wave of misinformation designed to sweep away any doubt. He detailed exorbitant, undocumented expenses and a culture of fiscal recklessness. He spoke of Alara with pity, painting her as a passionate but incompetent leader who had lost her way. The ongoing investigation by the Attorney General will reveal the full truth, he concluded, his face a mask of solemn duty. But we, as stewards of this city, cannot stand idly by. The Vance Institute needs new leadership to restore public trust. He had laid the final nail in her coffin. The audience was stunned into silence. Whispers erupted. Phones lit up as journalists filed their stories. Alara could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, a physical weight of judgment and condemnation. Mr. Sterling, sitting 2 rows back, refused to meet her gaze. Then, it was her turn. The moderator introduced her, her voice tinged with an awkward mix of protocol and pity. As Alara walked to the stage, the silence in the room was absolute, the tension immense, her career, her foundation, the futures of her students. It was all on the line. She reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, her hands perfectly steady. She did not look at the teleprompter. She looked directly into the main broadcast camera, as if speaking to each of the million viewers personally. Mr. Croft has presented you with a compelling story, she began, her voice clear and unwavering. A story of mismanagement and misplaced trust. It is a well-crafted fiction, and like all good fictions, it contains a kernel of truth. The truth is that the Vance Institute is under attack, but the perpetrator is not within our walls. He is standing on this very stage. A collective gasp went through the audience. Julian, seated on stage, stiffened, his polite smile tightening at the edges. Alara gestured to the screen behind her. Please, bring up the first file. Leo Pasternak's findings appeared. The analysis of the forged document, the proprietary software signature, the clear digital line pointing directly to Croft Innovations. This is the digital fingerprint of the document that was leaked to the press. It was created using software exclusive to Mr. Croft's company. She then presented the pattern of his shell corporations, all established on the same date. And this, she said, her voice dropping slightly, is the reason for this decade-long campaign of sabotage. A photograph filled the screen. It was the picture from her university days, a young Alara, a smiling Julian, and his sister, Sarah, at the center. This is Sarah Croft, Alara said, her voice thick with an emotion she no longer tried to hide. Julian's sister, and my friend, 10 years ago, on October 27th. She died in a car accident. I was the only other person in that car. I was the only survivor. The room was utterly silent. The business scandal had just become a Greek tragedy. Julian's face was ashen. He had not expected this. He had expected her to defend her finances, not to exhume their shared past. For 10 years, Alara continued, her composure finally beginning to crack, the fortress of stillness crumbling to reveal the wounded human being inside. Mr. Croft has blamed me for her death. He has channeled his grief into a relentless, private war against me. What you have witnessed over the past few weeks is simply the final, public battle of that war. She had him. She had exposed his motive, deconstructed his public persona, and revealed the obsessive, personal nature of his crusade. But she knew it wasn't enough. His supporters would see a grieving brother, lashing out in pain. She had to deliver the final, hidden truth. This was the part that would cost her everything. But the story Mr. Croft has told himself, the story that has fueled his grief and his rage, is also a fiction. She took a shaky breath. I have protected the truth of that night for a decade. Out of respect for a grieving family, I can no longer do so. A new document filled the screen. It was a scanned copy of the official, long-lost police report, which Anya's frantic search had finally unearthed from a dusty archive. This is the official accident report. As you can see from the toxicology results and the forensic analysis of the scene, Sarah was driving. Her blood alcohol level was nearly 3 times the legal limit. The skid marks indicate excessive speed on a wet road. Julian shot to his feet. "That's a lie, a forgery." "It is the truth." "Julian," Alara said, her voice breaking. She was no longer addressing the audience, but him. Tears streamed down her face, washing away the years of forced composure. "My last memory of that night is not of a crash. It is of me, screaming her name, trying to grab the wheel from her hands as she laughed and told me to relax. I tried to stop her. I tried to save her." The raw, unvarnished pain in her voice was undeniable. The public's perception of her shifted in that instant, from a cold, embattled executive to a lifelong victim of a trauma she had silently carried. She was not just a survivor. She was a protector who had guarded a painful secret at great personal cost. "You have spent 10 years building an empire on the memory of your sister," Alara said, her voice now a whisper that carried the weight of a decade of sorrow. "But you have been worshipping at the wrong altar. Your anger has been directed at the wrong person. The only person responsible for Sarah's death was Sarah herself." The truth, stark and brutal, landed in the silent room. Julian stared at the police report on the screen, his face a canvas of disbelief, horror, and dawning, agonizing comprehension. His entire vendetta, the central organizing principle of his adult life, was built on a foundation of sand. His grief had created a lie, and he had sacrificed everything, including his own humanity, to protect it. The summit, the live stream, the global audience, it all faded away. In that moment, there were only 2 people in the room, a woman finally unburdening herself of a terrible truth, and a man whose entire world had just been irrevocably shattered. Her victory was not triumphant. It was tragic. It was not an act of revenge, but an act of forced, brutal enlightenment. The aftermath was a hurricane. The live-streamed revelation became the biggest news story in the world. Julian Croft's empire, built on a carefully curated image of benevolent power, crumbled in a matter of hours. Croft Innovation's stock plummeted. Board members resigned in droves. Donors to his foundation pulled their funding. The media, which had once lionized him, now descended like vultures, picking apart every detail of the tragic story. The investigation into the Vance Institute was dropped by the Attorney General's office within a day, accompanied by a public apology. The Metropolis Chronicle issued a front-page retraction of their original story. The City Council fast-tracked the Community Partnership Grant, doubling the offered amount. Arthur Sterling and the other board members who had wavered offered their profound, fawning apologies. Alara accepted them with a cool, distant grace. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction in their reversal. She felt only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She had won. She had saved her institute, cleared her name, and vanquished her tormentor. But the victory felt hollow. In order to save herself, she had been forced to tear open her oldest, deepest wound and display it to the world. Her carefully constructed fortress of control was gone, and in its place was a raw, aching vulnerability. She stepped back from the spotlight, handing over daily operations of the Institute to a grateful and fiercely capable Anya. She stopped taking calls from reporters. She declined invitations to appear on talk shows. The world wanted to celebrate her as a hero, a symbol of resilience. But she didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a survivor who had just been forced to relive the crash all over again. She spent her days in quiet solitude, walking through the city's parks, sitting in anonymous coffee shops, simply breathing. She was processing not just the public spectacle of the summit, but the private trauma she had suppressed for a decade. The truth about Sarah's recklessness had been a shield, protecting the Croft family's memory. But it had also been a cage, trapping Alara in a role of silent complicity. By speaking the truth, she had freed herself. But the freedom was disorienting, like a prisoner stepping into sunlight for the first time in years. One afternoon, she received a letter delivered by a private courier. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. Dear Ms. Vance, it began. My name is Eleanor Croft. I am Julian and Sarah's mother. For 10 years, my husband and I have lived with a story that allowed us to grieve our daughter without dishonoring her memory. We see now that this story came at an unbearable cost to you. There are no words to express our sorrow for the pain our son has caused, or for the silence we kept. You did not just save your foundation. You gave our family the terrible, necessary gift of the truth. We will be forever in your debt. Tucked inside the letter was a small, faded photograph. It was a picture of Sarah as a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with a gap-toothed, mischievous grin. On the back, in the same elegant script, was a single sentence. This is how we will choose to remember her. Alara held the photo, tears welling in her eyes. It was an absolution she never knew she needed. It was an acknowledgement of her own loss, her own friendship with the vibrant, troubled girl who had died too soon. Her victory was no longer just about survival. It was now, finally, about the possibility of healing. Months later, autumn had settled over the city, painting the leaves in the trees outside the Vance Institute in hues of gold and crimson. The scandal had faded from the headlines, replaced by new dramas and new obsessions. What remained was a quiet, profound change. The Institute was thriving, its endowment swollen by an outpouring of support from donors who saw it not just as a school, but as a symbol of integrity and resilience. The students, once the subject of Julian's threats, were flourishing, their futures more secure than ever. The final scene of Alara's long war did not take place in a boardroom or on a public stage. It took place in the Institute's newly dedicated auditorium, filled with students, faculty, and supporters. Alara stood at the podium, not as a warrior, but as a leader, a teacher. She looked different. The severe, controlled armor of her past self was gone. Her hair was down, her expression softer, her eyes clear and present. The fortress had been dismantled, replaced by the quiet strength of an open heart. True empowerment, she began, her voice warm and resonant, is not about building walls to protect yourself from the world. It's about having the courage to tear them down. It's about taking the most painful parts of your story and transforming them into a source of strength. Not for yourself alone, but for others. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her students, the brilliant, hopeful, resilient young people who were her life's work. Today, we are proud to announce the establishment of a new, permanent scholarship at the Vance Institute. She continued, this scholarship is for students who have faced extraordinary adversity, for those who know what it means to survive, and for those who seek to build a better future from a difficult past. It will be called the Sarah Croft Memorial Scholarship for Second Chances. A quiet gasp rippled through the auditorium. To take the name of the woman at the center of her trauma, the symbol of a decade of persecution, and reframe it as a legacy of healing and opportunity was an act of profound grace. It was the ultimate reclamation of her own narrative. She was not erasing the past. She was reshaping it, using her restored power not just to win, but to create something beautiful and enduring from the ashes. The applause was heartfelt and sustained. Alara smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. Her work was not finished, but a critical chapter had come to a close. The war was over. The healing had begun. A week later, Anya entered Alara's office with a curious expression on her face. "Our finance department just flagged a new donation," she said. "It came in this morning, an anonymous wire transfer to the Sarah Croft Scholarship Fund." "We've been getting a lot of those," Alara said, looking up from her work. "Not like this one," Anya said, placing a printout on the desk. "It's for $5 million. Alara stared at the number, stunned. $5 million from who? "That's the thing," Anya said, pointing to the transfer details. "It's anonymous, routed through a dozen international banks. But the original transfer was initiated from a private holding company based in Switzerland." Anya had already done the research. The holding company is controlled by what remains of the Croft family's private wealth management firm. There's no name attached, no message, just the money. Alara looked at the document, at the silent, staggering sum. It was not an apology. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was a quiet, anonymous acknowledgement of a debt that could never truly be repaid. It was a final, surprising testament to the power of a truth spoken aloud, an echo in the silence, a quiet investment in a second chance,